The champagne glass slipped from Rachel's fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the grand ballroom as her brother Marcus stood at the microphone, his voice carrying across 200 wedding guests. What he said next would destroy her marriage before it even began, unravel years of carefully built trust, and expose a web of lies so intricate that even she didn't know where the truth ended and his fabrications began. But Marcus had made one critical mistake. He hadn't noticed the sharp-eyed woman in the back corner, quietly taking notes on everything he said. Attorney Sarah Castellanos had been invited as a +1, but tonight she would become Rachel's unexpected lifeline in what would turn into the most devastating betrayal she'd ever experienced.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning of October 15th began like a fairy tale. Rachel Morgan stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the bridal suite of the Riverside Country Club, watching her best friend Amanda carefully position the final pearl pins in her auburn hair. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting everything in a golden glow that made her ivory silk dress shimmer like captured starlight. "You look absolutely radiant," Amanda whispered, stepping back to admire her work. "David is going to cry when he sees you walking down that aisle." Rachel touched the pearl necklace at her throat, her grandmother's, and smiled at her reflection. At 28, she had built a successful career as a marketing director at Henderson & Associates, owned a beautiful townhouse in the historic district, and was about to marry the man who had been her anchor through every storm life had thrown at her. David Chen, with his gentle smile and unwavering support, had proposed on the anniversary of their first date 3 years ago. Everything was perfect, or so she thought. The door burst open and her younger sister Emma rushed in, still in her bridesmaid robe, her blonde hair half curled. "Rachel, we have a problem. Marcus is acting really weird." Rachel's stomach tightened slightly. Her brother Marcus had been distant for the past few months, ever since she'd announced her engagement. The brother who used to be her closest confidant, who had protected her from bullies in high school and celebrated every achievement with genuine pride, had become cold and critical. "Weird how?" Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "He keeps making these cryptic comments about truth coming out and people deserving to know who they're really marrying," Emma said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Mom tried to talk to him, but he just walked away." Amanda frowned, adjusting one of the flowers in Rachel's bouquet. "Maybe it's just pre-wedding jitters. You know how protective big brothers can be." But Rachel knew Marcus better than anyone. They had grown up in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street after their father left when she was 12 and Marcus was 15. He had stepped up in ways that no teenager should have to, working part-time jobs to help their mother Patricia make ends meet, walking Rachel to school every day, and making sure she never felt abandoned. That's what made his recent behavior so confusing and hurtful. "I'm sure he'll snap out of it once he sees how happy David makes me," Rachel said, though doubt crept into her voice. She had noticed the way Marcus looked at David, not with the brotherly skepticism she might expect, but with something that looked almost like disgust. An hour later, the bridal party gathered in the club's ornate lobby. Rachel's heart swelled as she watched her closest friends, Amanda, Emma, and her college roommate Jessica, laughing together in their sage green bridesmaid dresses. David's groomsmen stood nearby, talking quietly among themselves, all except Marcus, who leaned against a pillar with his arms crossed, staring out the window. David appeared at the top of the grand staircase, and Rachel felt her breath catch. He looked incredible in his charcoal gray tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, and when their eyes met, his face lit up with that smile that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. He made his way down to her, ignoring the traditional superstition about seeing the bride before the ceremony. "You are absolutely breathtaking," he whispered, taking her hands in his. "I can't believe I get to marry you." "Hey now, save some romance for the vows," called out David's best friend Tyler, grinning as he approached with the other groomsmen. "We've got a ceremony to get through first." That's when Marcus finally turned around. Rachel watched her brother's expression shift from blank indifference to something she couldn't quite identify as he looked at David. There was a coldness in his green eyes that made her shiver despite the warm October afternoon. Marcus, David said, extending his hand with a genuine smile. Thank you for standing up with me today. It means everything to Rachel, which means everything to me. Marcus stared at the offered hand for a long moment before finally shaking it. Yeah, well, that's what brothers do, right? We look out for our family. There was something in his tone that both Rachel and David exchanged worried glances, but before either could respond, the wedding coordinator appeared with her clipboard and infectious energy. All right, everyone, it's time. Groomsmen to the altar, bridesmaids to the back of the sanctuary. Let's make some magic happen. The ceremony itself was everything Rachel had dreamed of. The Riverside Country Club's chapel was decorated with white roses and eucalyptus, and soft piano music filled the air as she walked down the aisle on her mother's arm. David's eyes never left her face, and she could see him fighting back tears as she approached. Their vows were personal and heartfelt. David spoke about finding his home in Rachel's laugh, about her strength and kindness inspiring him to be a better man every day. Rachel promised to love him through all of life's adventures, to be his partner in building something beautiful together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause and tears. Rachel felt like she was floating as she and David kissed, sealing their union before God and their loved ones. But even in that perfect moment, she caught sight of Marcus standing at the altar. While everyone else was smiling and clapping, her brother's face remained stoic, almost grim. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the chapel's air conditioning. Marcus, David said, extending his hand with a genuine smile, thank you for standing up with me today. It means everything to Rachel, which means everything to me. Marcus stared at the offered hand for a long moment before finally shaking it. Yeah, well, that's what brothers do, right? We look out for our family. There was something in his tone that both Rachel and David exchanged worried glances, but before either could respond, the wedding coordinator appeared with her clipboard and infectious energy. All right, everyone, it's time. Groomsmen to the altar, bridesmaids to the back of the sanctuary. Let's make some magic happen. The ceremony itself was everything Rachel had dreamed of. The Riverside Country Club's chapel was decorated with white roses and eucalyptus, and soft piano music filled the air as she walked down the aisle on her mother's arm. David's eyes never left her face, and she could see him fighting back tears as she approached. Their vows were personal and heartfelt. David spoke about finding his home in Rachel's laugh, about her strength and kindness inspiring him to be a better man every day. Rachel promised to love him through all of life's adventures, to be his partner in building something beautiful together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause and tears. Rachel felt like she was floating as she and David kissed, sealing their union before God and their loved ones. But even in that perfect moment, she caught sight of Marcus standing at the altar. While everyone else was smiling and clapping, her brother's face remained stoic, almost grim. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the chapel's air conditioning. The cocktail hour on the terrace was filled with laughter and congratulations. Rachel moved through the crowd like she was in a dream, accepting hugs and well wishes, posing for photos with David's arm around her waist. Everything felt surreal and wonderful. Mrs. Chen, David whispered in her ear, and she giggled at the sound of her new name. I love the sound of that, she replied, leaning into him. They were interrupted by David's mother, Linda, who approached with a woman Rachel didn't recognize. Rachel, dear, I'd like you to meet Sarah Castellanos. She's Tyler's girlfriend. He brought her as his +1. Sarah was an elegant woman in her early 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an understated black dress. Her handshake was firm and confident. Congratulations, Rachel. You look absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for coming, Rachel said warmly. How do you know Tyler? We met at a charity fundraiser last month, Sarah replied with a smile. He's been talking about this wedding for weeks. David's clearly very loved by his friends. As they chatted, Rachel learned that Sarah was a corporate attorney specializing in defamation and business litigation. There was something about her presence that was both calming and quietly commanding, the kind of person you'd want in your corner if you were facing a serious problem. I hope you enjoy the reception, Rachel said, as the wedding coordinator signaled that dinner was about to be served. I'm sure I will, Sarah replied, though Rachel caught her glancing toward the head table where Marcus was already seated, his expression still unreadable. The reception hall was transformed into something magical. Strings of warm lights hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the round tables draped in cream linens. The head table overlooked the entire room, positioned perfectly for all the traditional wedding moments. Dinner was served, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, exactly what Rachel had chosen during their tasting months ago. She barely tasted her food, too caught up in the joy of the moment and the constant stream of friends and family stopping by to congratulate them. It was during the salad course that Marcus stood up, tapping his champagne glass with his fork. The sound echoed through the room, gradually quieting the conversations until all 200 guests were looking expectantly at the head table. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. "As Rachel's brother and David's best man, I've been asked to say a few words." Rachel felt David's hand find hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers. She smiled up at her brother, expecting a heartfelt speech about their childhood, about how happy she looked, about welcoming David into their family. "I've known Rachel my entire life," Marcus continued, his tone conversational but somehow cold. "And I've learned that sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the biggest secrets." Rachel's smile faltered. She felt David's grip on her hand tighten. "Now, I know what you're all thinking. What could sweet, perfect Rachel possibly be hiding?" Marcus paused, letting his eyes scan the room before landing on Rachel's face. "Well, let me tell you what kind of woman my sister really is." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The champagne glass slipped from Rachel's fingers, shattering against the floor as Marcus began to speak. And in the back corner of the room, Sarah Castellanos quietly pulled out her phone and began to take notes on every single word. Marcus's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. "You see, my dear sister has always been very good at presenting herself as the perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect employee. But what David doesn't know, what none of you know, is that Rachel has been living a lie for years." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. Around the reception hall, she could see guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some leaning forward with morbid curiosity, others looking away as if witnessing a car accident. "For instance," Marcus continued, his voice gaining confidence as he warmed to his subject, "did you know that Rachel was fired from her first job out of college for embezzling client funds? Oh, she's never mentioned that, has she?" "That's not true," Rachel whispered, but her voice was lost in the acoustics of the large room. David's face had gone pale beside her, his eyes fixed on Marcus with growing alarm. Marcus held up his hand as if he'd heard her denial. "Now, I know what you're thinking. Marcus, that's a serious accusation. And you're right, it is. But I have documentation." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a folded document. Termination papers from Bradley Marketing Solutions, citing financial irregularities totaling $15,000. Rachel's mind reeled. She had worked at Bradley Marketing Solutions for exactly 6 months after college, her first real job. She'd left because the company culture was toxic, and her supervisor had been inappropriate with the female employees. She'd given proper notice and left on good terms with HR. "Marcus, stop this," their mother Patricia called out from table 3, her voice shaking. "This isn't the time or place." "Oh, but it is the perfect time," Marcus interrupted, his eyes never leaving Rachel's horrified face. "Because David deserves to know what kind of family he's marrying into. He deserves to know about the gambling addiction." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Rachel felt like she was drowning, unable to catch her breath. Gambling addiction? She had never placed so much as a lottery ticket bet in her entire life. "You see, Rachel has been hiding a serious gambling problem for the past 3 years," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing tragic news. "She's been attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice a week, though she tells everyone she's at yoga class." David turned to look at her, His brown eyes filled with confusion and hurt. Rachel, is any of this true? No, she managed to choke out, her voice barely audible. David, none of this is true. I don't understand why he's. Which brings me to the real reason I felt compelled to speak tonight, Marcus said, raising his voice to talk over her. The reason that David, as her husband, has a right to know. Rachel has been stealing from her current employer, Henderson and Associates, for the past 18 months. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Rachel heard someone's chair scrape against the floor, and out of the corner of her eye, she saw several guests reaching for their phones. She's been skimming money from client accounts to feed her gambling habit, Marcus continued relentlessly. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here, 1,000 there, but it escalated. According to my sources, she's stolen over $40,000 in the past year alone. Rachel stood up so quickly that her chair toppled backward. "Stop it," she screamed, her voice finally carrying across the room. "None of this is true. Marcus, how can you stand there and lie like this?" Marcus looked at her with what appeared to be genuine sadness. "I know it's hard to hear, Rachel. Addiction makes people do terrible things. But David deserves to know what he's gotten himself into." "These are lies," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "David, you know me. You know I would never." "Actually," Marcus interrupted, pulling out his phone, "I have proof of that too. Voice recordings of Rachel admitting to taking money from client accounts, text messages between her and her bookie discussing payment schedules." Rachel felt the world spinning around her. This was impossible. None of these things had ever happened, yet Marcus was presenting evidence with the confidence of someone who absolutely believed what he was saying. David stood up beside her, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. "Marcus, I don't know what kind of game this is, but—" "It's not a game," Marcus said firmly. "It's the truth that Rachel has been hiding from all of you. And there's more." Rachel watched in horror as her brother seemed to transform before her eyes. The Marcus she had grown up with, the one who had comforted her after nightmares, who had taught her to ride a bike, who had been her protector and confidant, was gone. In his place stood a stranger who was systematically destroying her life with what appeared to be carefully constructed lies. "Rachel has also been having an affair," Marcus announced, and this time the room fell into complete, deathly silence. "With her boss, Robert Henderson. It's been going on for over a year. She's been using the relationship to cover up the theft." Rachel's legs gave out, and she would have collapsed if David hadn't caught her arm. The accusation was so outrageous, so completely fabricated, that she couldn't even form words to defend herself. Robert Henderson was a 60-year-old man who had been happily married for 30 years and treated her like a daughter. "I have photos," Marcus said, once again reaching into his jacket. "Hotel receipts, credit card statements showing expensive dinners, all the evidence anyone would need to see what's really been going on." David's grip on her arm loosened, and Rachel saw doubt creeping into his eyes. After 3 years together, after everything they'd shared, she could see him starting to question whether he really knew her at all. "David, please," she whispered desperately. "You know me. You know none of this is true." But Marcus wasn't finished. "The really tragic part is that she's convinced herself these relationships are real. The gambling addiction has made her delusional. She actually believes she's a good person, that she's not hurting anyone. Classic addict behavior, denial and justification." Rachel looked around the room at the faces of everyone she loved. Her mother was crying openly, her hands pressed to her mouth. Emma had gone sheet white and was staring at Marcus as if she'd never seen him before. David's parents looked stunned and horrified. Her friends were whispering among themselves, some looking at her with pity, others with suspicion. "I know this is painful for everyone to hear," Marcus continued, his voice now taking on a tone of false compassion. "But I couldn't let David enter into this marriage without knowing the truth. He deserves better than to be tied to someone who will drag him down with her problems." That's when Rachel noticed something that made her blood run cold. Throughout his entire speech, Marcus had been speaking with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed every word, every pause, every dramatic revelation. This wasn't a brother concerned about his sister's welfare. This was a calculated, deliberate attack designed to destroy her life in the most public way possible. But why? What had she ever done to make her own brother hate her this much? As Marcus finally lowered the microphone, the silence in the room was deafening. Rachel could hear her own heartbeat, could feel 200 pairs of eyes staring at her, waiting for her response, waiting to see if she would confess or deny, if she would break down or fight back. In the back corner of the room, Sarah Castellanos closed her note-taking app and quietly slipped out of her seat, her sharp legal mind already analyzing every word Marcus had spoken. She had heard enough fabricated evidence in courtrooms to recognize it when she saw it, and something about this entire performance had set off every alarm bell in her attorney's instincts. Rachel stood there in her beautiful wedding dress, surrounded by the ruins of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and realized that her brother hadn't just told lies about her. He had declared war. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before David's best friend Tyler stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Marcus, what the hell is wrong with you? This is your sister's wedding day." "This is exactly when she needs to hear the truth," Marcus replied coolly, straightening his tie as if he'd just given a toast about Rachel's childhood accomplishments instead of systematically destroying her reputation. Rachel watched in numb shock as the reception hall erupted into chaos. Guests were standing up, talking in hushed, urgent tones. Some were clearly preparing to leave, gathering their purses and jackets with embarrassed expressions. Others crowded closer to the head table, straining to hear what would happen next. "David," Rachel turned to her new husband, her voice cracking. "Please, you have to believe me. None of what he said is true. I've never stolen anything, I've never gambled, I've never cheated on you. You know me." David's face was a mask of confusion and pain. "I thought I did," he said quietly, and those 4 words hit Rachel like a physical blow. "But Rachel, he has documents, photos. How could he make all of that up?" "I don't know." Rachel's voice rose to near hysteria. "I don't understand any of this. Marcus, why are you doing this to me? What did I ever do to you?" Marcus looked at her with an expression that might have been pity if she didn't know better. "I'm trying to save you from yourself, Rachel. You're sick. You need help, not a wedding." That's when their mother, Patricia, pushed through the crowd surrounding the head table, her face streaked with tears and mascara. "Marcus Anthony Morgan, you stop this right now. I don't know what's gotten into you, but your sister doesn't deserve this." "Mom, you've been enabling her for years," Marcus said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "You've ignored all the warning signs because you didn't want to see the truth." "What warning signs?" Patricia demanded. "What truth? Rachel is the most honest, hard-working person I know. She's never given me a moment's trouble." "That's because she's been lying to you, too," Marcus replied. "The late nights she claims are work-related, the mysterious phone calls, the expensive clothes and jewelry on a marketing director's salary. You never questioned any of it because you didn't want to admit your perfect daughter was stealing money to fund her addictions." Rachel looked down at her pearl necklace, her grandmother's necklace that she'd inherited 5 years ago, and realized with growing horror that Marcus was twisting even the most innocent details of her life into evidence of criminal behavior. Emma finally found her voice, stepping up beside their mother. "Marcus, you're scaring me. This isn't like you at all. Rachel doesn't have expensive clothes and jewelry. She shops at Target and wears grandma's old jewelry. Are you having some kind of breakdown?" But before Marcus could respond, a new voice cut through the chaos. "Excuse me, everyone." Sarah Castellanos had approached the head table, her phone in her hand and her expression professionally calm. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think there are some things that need to be clarified here." Marcus turned to look at her, and Rachel caught a flicker of something, surprise, concern, cross his face. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Sarah Castellanos, attorney at law," she replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding courtrooms. "I've been taking detailed notes of everything you've said tonight, and I have some serious concerns about the accusations you've made." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Where before it had been shocking and voyeuristic, now it felt charged with anticipation. "I don't understand what business this is of yours," Marcus said, his confident demeanor beginning to crack slightly. "It becomes my business when I witness what appears to be a systematic campaign of defamation against an individual," Sarah replied smoothly. "You've made some very serious accusations tonight: embezzlement, adultery, gambling addiction. You claim to have documentation to support these claims. I'd like to see that documentation." Marcus clutched the papers in his jacket pocket. "These are private family matters." "No, they're not," Sarah interrupted. "The moment you made these accusations in front of 200 witnesses, they became public statements. And if they're false, they constitute defamation per se, which is grounds for both civil and criminal action." Rachel felt a spark of hope for the first time since Marcus had begun speaking. She didn't know who this woman was or why she was helping, but the professional authority in her voice was like a lifeline in a storm. "You can't prove they're false," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Actually, I can," Sarah replied. "Or rather, you'll have to prove they're true. See, in defamation cases involving accusations of criminal activity, the burden of proof is on the accuser to demonstrate that their statements are factual. So let's start with your first claim, that Rachel was fired for embezzlement from Bradley Marketing Solutions." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling. "I took the liberty of looking up Bradley Marketing Solutions during your speech. Interesting company. According to their LinkedIn page and public filings, they went out of business 4 years ago, after the owner was convicted of tax fraud. Hardly the kind of place that would have been conducting internal embezzlement investigations." Marcus's face went pale. That doesn't prove anything." "It proves your story doesn't add up," Sarah continued calmly. "Now, let's talk about these gambling addiction claims. You mentioned Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice a week. GA meetings are anonymous, but they do keep general attendance records for insurance purposes. There's no Rachel Morgan registered with any GA chapter in this metropolitan area." Rachel watched her brother's confident facade crumbling in real time. Whatever game he'd been playing, he clearly hadn't expected anyone to fact-check his claims. "And your claim about Henderson and Associates," Sarah continued relentlessly, "that's particularly interesting because I actually know Robert Henderson professionally. We've worked on several cases together over the years. He's not only happily married, but his company has some of the most stringent financial controls in the industry. Every client transaction is monitored by multiple departments. The kind of systematic theft you're describing would be literally impossible." David, who had been listening with growing amazement, finally spoke up. "Marcus, is any of what you said tonight true?" For the first time since he'd taken the microphone, Marcus seemed to be at a loss for words. He looked around the room, at the faces staring at him, his mother's tear-streaked face, Emma's expression of betrayal, the wedding guests who had gone from shocked sympathy to growing suspicion. I have the documentation," he stammered, pulling the papers from his pocket with shaking hands. "It's all here." Sarah extended her hand. "Then you won't mind showing it to everyone." Marcus hesitated, clutching the papers to his chest. In that moment of hesitation, Rachel saw the truth written across his face as clearly as if he'd confessed. The documents were fake. All of it. Every accusation, every piece of evidence, every devastating revelation had been fabricated. "Why?" Rachel whispered, the question ripping from her throat like a physical thing. "Marcus, why would you do this to me? Why would you want to destroy my life?" He looked at her then, and for just a moment, she saw a flash of the brother she remembered, vulnerable, scared, and deeply ashamed. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by something harder and more desperate. "Because you don't deserve to be happy," he said quietly, and the words fell into the silence like stones into still water. "You've always been everyone's favorite. Perfect Rachel, with her perfect grades and her perfect job and her perfect life. Do you have any idea what it's like to live in the shadow of someone who everyone thinks can do no wrong?" The raw pain in his voice was unmistakable, but it only made Rachel feel more confused and hurt. "Marcus, I never." You never had to try, he continued, his voice getting louder. Everything just came so easily to you. School, career, relationships. Meanwhile, I've struggled with everything. I've been in therapy for depression for 3 years. I've been unemployed for 6 months. My girlfriend left me because she said I was too negative and jealous of my own sister's success. The room was deadly quiet now, everyone realizing they were witnessing something much deeper and more painful than a simple wedding day attack. So, when I saw you in that perfect dress about to marry that perfect man in this perfect venue, Marcus continued, tears finally starting to stream down his face, I just couldn't stand it anymore. I thought if I could make everyone see that you weren't really perfect, that you had problems too, then maybe, he trailed off, seeming to realize for the first time what he had actually done. Around the room, 200 people stared at him in a mixture of pity and disgust. Sarah Castellanos quietly tucked her phone back into her purse. She had more than enough evidence now to destroy Marcus in court if necessary. But looking at the broken man in front of her, she realized that he had already destroyed himself far more effectively than any lawsuit ever could. The question now was whether Rachel's marriage and her family could survive the wreckage he'd left behind. The silence that followed Marcus's confession was broken by the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as guests began to leave in uncomfortable clusters. Some approached Rachel with whispered apologies and sympathetic touches on her arm, while others simply gathered their belongings and slipped out quietly, unwilling to become further entangled in what had become a family crisis rather than a celebration.
David stood frozen beside Rachel, his hands clenched at his sides, staring at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. "You fabricated evidence," he said slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. "You created fake documents to destroy your own sister's reputation on her wedding day." "David, Marcus started, but Tyler cut him off. "No, man, just no." Tyler's face was flushed with anger as he stepped closer to Marcus. "I've known you for 3 years. I thought I knew what kind of person you were. But this?" He gestured around the nearly empty reception hall. "This is psychotic." Sarah Castellanos had remained near the head table, quietly observing the family dynamics while making additional notes on her phone. As a litigation attorney, she had seen her share of family disputes, but the calculated nature of Marcus's attack was unusual even by her standards. "Mrs. Chen," Sarah said, addressing Rachel by her new married name with deliberate emphasis, "I need you to understand something. What happened here tonight goes far beyond family drama. Your brother has committed several serious crimes." Rachel looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Crimes?" "Defamation per se, for starters," Sarah explained, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "When someone makes false statements about criminal activity, moral turpitude, or professional misconduct, it's automatically considered defamatory without having to prove damages. But this goes deeper than that." She turned to address Marcus directly. "You mentioned having voice recordings and text messages. Did you actually create fake evidence to support your accusations?" Marcus's lawyer would later tell him he should have remained silent, but in his emotional state, he answered without thinking. I may have used some audio editing software to create conversations that sounded like Rachel admitting things." A collective gasp went up from the remaining guests. Even Patricia, who had been clinging to hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding, covered her mouth in shock. "Audio editing software?" Sarah repeated, her voice taking on the sharp edge she used in cross-examinations. "So you deliberately created false evidence with the intent to destroy your sister's reputation and marriage? That's not just defamation, that's criminal fraud. In some jurisdictions, it could be considered domestic terrorism." "Domestic terrorism?" Emma whispered, her face going even paler. "Marcus, what have you done?" But Sarah wasn't finished. She had been thinking about the timeline and preparation this would have required, and something didn't add up. "Marcus, how long have you been planning this?
The level of detail in your accusations, the fake documents, the edited audio files, this isn't something you put together in a few days. Marcus slumped into his chair, the fight going out of him completely. 6 months, he admitted quietly, ever since Rachel announced her engagement. The admission hit the family like another bombshell. 6 months of deliberate planning to destroy his sister's happiness? 6 months of researching her life, her job, her relationships, looking for vulnerabilities to exploit. 6 months of creating an elaborate web of lies designed to humiliate her in the most public way possible. My God, Marcus, Patricia breathed. 6 months of lying to all of us. 6 months of pretending to be happy for your sister while you were plotting against her? Rachel had been silent through most of this exchange, still trying to process the magnitude of her brother's betrayal. But now she stood up, her wedding dress rustling around her, and faced Marcus directly. "The unemployment," she said suddenly, pieces clicking together in her mind. "You've been unemployed for 6 months, not 3. You lost your job right around the time I got engaged, didn't you?" Marcus couldn't meet her eyes, but his silence was answer enough. "That's when this started," Rachel continued, her voice growing stronger as understanding dawned. "You didn't just wake up one day and decide to destroy my wedding. You've been spiraling for months, and instead of asking for help, you decided to drag me down with you." David had been listening to this exchange with growing comprehension. As a software engineer, he understood the technical aspects of what Marcus had done better than most. "Creating convincing fake audio files isn't easy," he said slowly. "You'd need sophisticated software, technical knowledge, and a lot of time. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a premeditated character assassination." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Exactly. And that level of premeditation makes this much more serious from a legal standpoint. Marcus, you need to understand that you've opened yourself up to multiple felony charges. Wire fraud if you used electronic communications to spread the false evidence, conspiracy charges if anyone helped you, and depending on how you created and distributed these fake recordings, potentially violation of wiretapping laws." "I didn't think," Marcus started. "No, you didn't think," Rachel interrupted, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. "You didn't think about how this would affect me, or David, or our marriage. You didn't think about Mom having to watch her son destroy her daughter's life. You didn't think about Emma having to choose between her siblings. You only thought about your own pain and decided everyone else should suffer for it." The reception hall was nearly empty now, with only the immediate family, the wedding party, and Sarah remained. The beautiful decorations looked surreal in the aftermath of the destruction. White roses and twinkling lights framing a scene of devastation. Tyler approached David with an expression of deep regret. "Man, I am so sorry. I had no idea Marcus was capable of something like this. If I had known—" "It's not your fault," David said wearily. "None of us knew." But Rachel was still focused on her brother, trying to understand how the person who had once been her protector had become her destroyer. "Marcus, do you have any idea what you've done to my career? I'll have to face my colleagues on Monday knowing that 200 people heard you accuse me of embezzlement. Even though it's not true, the rumors will follow me. Some clients might request different account managers. My boss will have to address the accusations formally." "I can fix it," Marcus desperately. "I'll call everyone. I'll send emails explaining that I made it all up. "You can't fix this," Sarah interrupted firmly. "The damage is done. The only thing you can do now is minimize the legal consequences for yourself and try to make whatever amends are possible to your family." She turned to Rachel and David. "You two need to make some decisions about how you want to proceed. You have grounds for a civil lawsuit that could result in substantial damages. The criminal charges would be handled by the district attorney's office, but you'd need to file a police report to get that process started." Rachel felt overwhelmed by the choices suddenly thrust upon her. An hour ago, she had been dancing at her wedding reception. Now she was being asked to decide whether to send her own brother to prison. "I need some air," she said suddenly, gathering up the skirt of her wedding dress. "I need to think." David immediately moved to follow her, but she held up a hand. "Please, just
give me a few minutes alone." She walked out onto the terrace where the cocktail hour had been held just hours earlier. The October evening was cool, and she wrapped her arms around herself as she looked out over the golf course that stretched into the darkness beyond the country club.
Behind her, she could hear the muffled voices of her family trying to figure out what to do next. Sarah was explaining the legal process to her mother and Emma. David was talking quietly with Tyler about what this meant for their honeymoon plans. And somewhere in that mix was Marcus, the brother she had loved and trusted for 28 years, who had spent 6 months systematically planning her destruction. As she stood there in her ruined wedding dress, looking out at the darkness, Rachel realized that the hardest part wasn't deciding what to do about Marcus legally. The hardest part was accepting that the brother she had grown up with, the one who had taught her to tie her shoes and helped her with homework and walked her to school every day, had never really existed at all. Or maybe he had existed once, but somewhere along the way, jealousy and mental illness had twisted him into someone unrecognizable, someone who could look her in the eye and smile while secretly planning to destroy everything she held dear. The question now was whether any part of their relationship could be salvaged, or if Marcus had poisoned it so thoroughly that it could never be repaired. As the cool night air began to clear her head, Rachel heard footsteps on the terrace behind her. She turned to see Sarah Castellanos approaching, having given her a few minutes of privacy. "I know this is overwhelming," Sarah said gently, "but there's something else you need to know about the legal situation, something that might influence your decision about how to proceed." Sarah joined Rachel on the terrace, her expression grave in the moonlight. "I'm sorry to intrude on your privacy, but there's something you need to know that changes everything about this situation." Rachel turned to face her, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. What could possibly make this worse? "Marcus didn't act alone," Sarah said quietly. "While everyone was focused on his confession, I was watching the remaining guests' reactions. There's someone else involved in this conspiracy, and they're still here." The words hit Rachel like ice water. "What do you mean, someone else?" Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Rachel a series of screenshots. "I've been monitoring social media during the reception. Someone has been live posting updates about the accusations, complete with photos and videos of Marcus's speech. But here's the thing, the posts started before Marcus even took the microphone." Rachel stared at the phone screen in disbelief. The posts were detailed, professional-looking, and clearly designed to maximize damage to her reputation. Who posted these? "That's what we need to find out," Sarah said. But whoever it is knew exactly what Marcus was going to say and when. This wasn't just family drama. This was a coordinated attack designed to destroy your reputation both personally and professionally. They were interrupted by the sound of the terrace door opening. David stepped outside, his tie loosened and his face etched with concern. "Rachel, we need to talk. There's been a development." Behind him came Tyler, looking more serious than Rachel had ever seen him. "Sarah, I think you need to hear this too. Marcus just told us something that changes everything." The four of them gathered around one of the small cocktail tables that still bore remnants of the evening's celebration, empty champagne flutes and scattered rose petals that now seemed to mock the devastation that had followed. "Marcus admitted that someone approached him about 3 weeks ago," David said. "Someone who claimed to have information about Rachel that she was hiding from me." Rachel felt her blood run cold. Who? Who would do that? Tyler ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling with what he was about to reveal. "It was Stephanie Winters, my ex-girlfriend." The name hit Rachel like a physical blow. Stephanie Winters, the woman David had dated for 2 years before they met, the woman who had made it clear she wasn't happy when David moved on, the woman who had been conspicuously absent from their wedding despite being in their extended social circle. "Stephanie," Rachel whispered. "But why would she?" "Because she's never gotten over David," Tyler said miserably. "I've known for months that she's been obsessed with breaking you two up. I thought it was just harmless jealousy, but apparently she's been planning this for a long time."
Sarah leaned forward, her attorney instincts fully engaged. Tell me exactly what Marcus said about their interactions. Tyler looked sick. Stephanie contacted Marcus through social media about a month after you announced your engagement. She told him she had concerns about Rachel's character and that she felt David was making a mistake. She started feeding him information, or what he thought was information, about Rachel's supposed problems. What kind of information? David demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Financial records that looked legitimate but were completely fabricated. Stories about Rachel's supposed behavior at work that were twisted versions of normal office interactions. Even photos that were digitally manipulated to make innocent situations look suspicious. Rachel felt nauseous. She's been watching me for months, following me? It gets worse, Tyler continued. She convinced Marcus that the family needed to stage an intervention, but that it had to be public to be effective. She told him that if he didn't expose Rachel's problems at the wedding, David's life would be ruined. Sarah was taking rapid notes on her phone. So Stephanie Winters provided the false evidence, helped Marcus plan the timing, and is now spreading the accusations online to maximize damage. This isn't just defamation. This is conspiracy to commit fraud and possibly stalking. David stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the terrace. I dated that woman for 2 years. I thought I knew her. How could she be capable of something this calculating and cruel? People can hide their true nature for a long time, Sarah said grimly, and obsession can drive people to extremes they never would have considered otherwise. The question now is, what do we do about it? Rachel felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. She had been prepared to consider forgiveness for Marcus. He was family, he was clearly struggling with mental health issues, and his actions, while devastating, had come from a place of pain and jealousy she could at least understand. But Stephanie was different. Stephanie had coldly and deliberately orchestrated a campaign to destroy Rachel's life for the sole purpose of trying to win back a man who had moved on. There was no family bond to consider, no mental illness to excuse her behavior. This was pure malice. I want to prosecute both of them to the full extent of the law, Rachel said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Stephanie doesn't get to destroy my life because she can't accept that David chose me. Rachel, David said, returning to the table and taking her hands, I am so sorry. I had no idea she was capable of this. If I had known— It's not your fault, Rachel interrupted. You can't control other people's actions, but we can control our response to them. Sarah nodded approvingly. Good, because with 2 defendants, we have a much stronger case. Conspiracy charges carry serious penalties, and the evidence of premeditation is overwhelming.
Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair. There's something else. Marcus said Stephanie recorded their phone conversations. She has hours of audio of him agreeing to her plan, expressing doubts about going through with it, and her convincing him to continue. She recorded him? David's eyebrows shot up. Why would she do that? Insurance, Sarah said immediately. If things went wrong, she wanted to be able to throw Marcus under the bus and claim she was just a concerned friend trying to help. Classic manipulation technique. Create evidence that makes your co-conspirator look like the instigator while preserving your own plausible deniability. Rachel felt a chill at the calculated nature of Stephanie's planning. So she was prepared to destroy Marcus too, if necessary. Absolutely. She used his vulnerability and mental health struggles to manipulate him into doing her dirty work, and she documented everything so she could abandon him if the plan backfired. The terrace door opened again, and Patricia emerged, followed by Emma and Marcus. Marcus looked like he had aged 10 years in the past hour, his face pale and his eyes red-rimmed. He approached the group hesitantly, clearly unsure of his reception. I told them about Stephanie, he said quietly, addressing Rachel. I know it doesn't excuse what I did, but I wanted you to know that she's the one who gave me all the fake evidence. She's the one who convinced me you were hiding things from David. Rachel looked at her brother.
really looked at him and saw not the confident, malicious person who had taken the microphone earlier, but a broken man who had been expertly manipulated by someone far more calculating than he was. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I need you to understand something. What Stephanie did to you doesn't excuse your choices, but it does explain them. You're as much her victim as I am." Marcus's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. I was so angry and jealous, and when she contacted me with all this fake evidence, it felt like validation for everything I was feeling. I wanted to believe it was true because it made my own failures feel less significant." Patricia put her arm around her son, her own face streaked with tears. "We're going to get you help, Marcus. Real help. But first, we need to deal with the legal situation." Sarah stood up, her phone buzzing with notifications. "Speaking of which, I just received confirmation that Stephanie has been posting updates about tonight's events on multiple social media platforms. She's not just spreading the defamatory content, she's actively amplifying it and adding her own commentary." She showed them her phone screen, where Stephanie's social media accounts displayed a carefully crafted narrative about finally exposing the truth about Rachel Morgan and protecting David from a manipulative gold digger. "She's not even trying to hide her involvement anymore," David said, his voice filled with disgust. "She's taking credit for the whole thing." "Good," Sarah said with grim satisfaction. "That makes our case much easier to prove. She's creating a public record of her participation in the conspiracy." Rachel felt a surge of determination. The woman who had tried to destroy her marriage, manipulate her brother, and orchestrate this entire nightmare was still out there, probably celebrating what she thought was her victory. "Sarah," Rachel said, "I want to file charges against both of them first thing Monday morning, and I want to pursue civil damages for every penny this has cost me. Reputation, potential career damage, the ruined wedding, everything." "Absolutely. And Rachel, I think you should know that I'm going to take this case pro bono. What they did to you goes beyond ordinary defamation. This was a sophisticated, coordinated attack designed to destroy your life, and I won't let them get away with it." As they prepared to leave the country club, the site of what should have been the happiest day of Rachel's life, Rachel realized that while her wedding had been ruined, her marriage was stronger than ever. David had stood by her through the worst betrayal imaginable, and together they would make sure that both Marcus and Stephanie faced the full consequences of their actions. The real fight was just beginning. 6 months after the wedding that shook their world, Rachel Chen sat in the mahogany-paneled courtroom of the Superior Court of California, watching as Judge Margaret Harrison reviewed the final sentencing documents. Beside her, Sarah Castellanos organized her files with the satisfied precision of an attorney who had just delivered a flawless prosecution. Across the courtroom, Stephanie Winters sat rigidly in her Orange County jail uniform, her once perfect blonde hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail. The transformation from the polished marketing executive she had once been to the convicted felon she had become was stark and complete. "Ms. Winters," Judge Harrison began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have been found guilty on multiple felony counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal defamation, cyberstalking, and identity theft in connection with the creation of false evidence. The court has reviewed the extensive documentation of your systematic campaign to destroy Ms. Chen's reputation and marriage." Rachel felt David's hand squeeze hers as they listened to the judge detail the evidence that had sealed Stephanie's fate. The recorded phone calls with Marcus, the digital forensics proving she'd created the fake documents, the social media trail showing months of surveillance and planning. It had all painted a picture of obsession that even Stephanie's high-powered defense attorney couldn't explain away. The level of premeditation and malice demonstrated in this case is extraordinary. You didn't simply make false statements in a moment of anger or jealousy. You crafted an elaborate conspiracy designed to destroy an innocent woman's life, manipulated a vulnerable individual to carry out your plan, and then amplified the damage through social media with the specific intent of causing maximum harm. Stephanie's attorney, James Morrison, had tried everything. Claims of mental illness, arguments about the emotional nature of romantic jealousy, even attempts to shift blame entirely onto Marcus. But Sarah had systematically demolished each defense with the mountain of evidence they had gathered. Furthermore, the judge said, your complete lack of remorse throughout this process has been noted by the court. Even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of your actions, you continued to maintain that you were protecting Mr. Chen from a manipulative woman. This demonstrates a fundamental inability to accept responsibility for your criminal behavior. Rachel had watched Stephanie throughout the 6-month legal process, from her initial arrest through the trial. Even now, as her sentence was being delivered, Stephanie showed no signs of genuine remorse. Her face remained cold and calculating, as if she were still looking for an angle to exploit. Ms. Winters, you are hereby sentenced to 3 years in state prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $250,000 to cover Ms. Chen's legal fees, lost wages, and damages related to the harm caused to her reputation and career. The gavel came down with finality, and Rachel felt a weight she had been carrying for months finally lift from her shoulders. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the nightmare was officially over. Marcus's sentencing had taken place 2 months earlier in a different courtroom. His situation was more complex, given his role as both perpetrator and victim of Stephanie's manipulation. Sarah had worked with the prosecution to ensure he received appropriate consequences while also getting the mental health treatment he desperately needed. He'd been sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility with extensive counseling programs, followed by 3 years of probation and mandatory therapy. He was also required to pay restitution to Rachel, though the amount was significantly less than Stephanie's, reflecting his status as someone who had been manipulated rather than the primary architect of the scheme.
Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair. There's something else. Marcus said Stephanie recorded their phone conversations. She has hours of audio of him agreeing to her plan, expressing doubts about going through with it, and her convincing him to continue. She recorded him? David's eyebrows shot up. Why would she do that? Insurance, Sarah said immediately. If things went wrong, she wanted to be able to throw Marcus under the bus and claim she was just a concerned friend trying to help. Classic manipulation technique. Create evidence that makes your co-conspirator look like the instigator while preserving your own plausible deniability. Rachel felt a chill at the calculated nature of Stephanie's planning. So she was prepared to destroy Marcus too, if necessary. Absolutely. She used his vulnerability and mental health struggles to manipulate him into doing her dirty work, and she documented everything so she could abandon him if the plan backfired. The terrace door opened again, and Patricia emerged, followed by Emma and Marcus. Marcus looked like he had aged 10 years in the past hour, his face pale and his eyes red-rimmed. He approached the group hesitantly, clearly unsure of his reception. I told them about Stephanie, he said quietly, addressing Rachel. I know it doesn't excuse what I did, but I wanted you to know that she's the one who gave me all the fake evidence. She's the one who convinced me you were hiding things from David. Rachel looked at her brother, really looked at him, and saw not the confident, malicious person who had taken the microphone earlier, but a broken man who had been expertly manipulated by someone far more calculating than he was. Marcus, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. What Stephanie did to you doesn't excuse your choices, but it does explain them. You're as much her victim as I am. Marcus's face crumpled. I'm so sorry, Rachel. I was so angry and jealous, and when she contacted me with all this evidence, it felt like validation for everything I was feeling. I wanted to believe it was true because it made my own failures feel less significant.
Patricia put her arm around her son, her own face streaked with tears. "We are going to get you help, Marcus. Real help. But first, we need to deal with the legal situation." Sarah stood up, her phone buzzing with notifications. "Speaking of which, I just received confirmation that Stephanie has been posting updates about tonight's events on multiple social media platforms. She's not just spreading the defamatory content, she's actively amplifying it and adding her own commentary." She showed them her phone screen, where Stephanie's social media accounts displayed a carefully crafted narrative about finally exposing the truth about Rachel Morgan and protecting David from a manipulative gold digger. "She's not even trying to hide her involvement anymore," David said, his voice filled with disgust. "She's taking credit for the whole thing." "Good," Sarah said with grim satisfaction. "That makes our case much easier to prove. She's creating a public record of her participation in the conspiracy." Rachel felt a surge of determination. The woman who had tried to destroy her marriage, manipulated her brother, and orchestrated this entire nightmare was still out there, probably celebrating what she thought was her victory. "Sarah," Rachel said, "I want to file charges against both of them first thing Monday morning. And I want to pursue civil damages for every penny this has cost me. Reputation, potential career damage, the ruined budding, everything." "Absolutely, Rachel. And Rachel, I think you should know that I'm going to take this case pro bono. What they did to you goes beyond ordinary defamation. This was a sophisticated, coordinated attack designed to destroy your life, and I won't let them get away with it." As they prepared to leave the country club, the site of what should have been the happiest day of Rachel's life, she realized that while her wedding had been ruined, her marriage was stronger than ever. David had stood by her through the worst betrayal imaginable, and together, they would make sure that both Marcus and Stephanie faced the full consequences of their actions. The real fight was just beginning. 6 months after the wedding that shook their world, Rachel Chen sat in the mahogany-paneled courtroom of the Superior Court of California, watching as Judge Margaret Harrison reviewed the final sentencing documents. Beside her, Sarah Castellanos organized her files with the satisfied precision of an attorney who had just delivered a flawless prosecution. Across the courtroom, Stephanie Winters sat rigidly in her Orange County Jail uniform, her once perfect blonde hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail. The transformation from the polished marketing executive she'd once been to the convicted felon she'd become was stark and complete. "Miss Winters," Judge Harrison began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have been found guilty on multiple felony counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal defamation, cyberstalking, and identity theft in connection with the creation of false evidence." Rachel felt David's hand squeeze hers as they listened to the judge detail the evidence that had sealed Stephanie's fate. The recorded phone calls with Marcus, the digital forensics proving she'd created the fake documents, the social media trail showing months of surveillance and planning, it had all painted a picture of obsession that even Stephanie's high-powered defense attorney couldn't explain away. "The level of premeditation and malice demonstrated in this case is extraordinary," Judge Harrison continued. "You didn't simply make false statements in a moment of anger or jealousy. You crafted an elaborate conspiracy designed to destroy an innocent woman's life, manipulated a vulnerable individual to carry out your plan, and then amplified the damage through social media with the specific intent of causing maximum harm." Stephanie's attorney, James Morrison, had tried everything: claims of mental illness, arguments about the emotional nature of romantic jealousy, even attempts to shift blame entirely onto Marcus. But Sarah had systematically demolished each defense with the mountain of evidence they'd gathered. "Furthermore," the judge said, "your complete lack of remorse throughout this process has been noted by the court. Even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of your actions, you continue to maintain that you were protecting Mr. Chen from a manipulative woman. This demonstrates a fundamental inability to accept responsibility for your criminal behavior." Rachel had watched Stephanie throughout the 6-month legal process, from her initial arrest through the trial. Even now, as her sentence was being delivered, Stephanie showed no signs of genuine remorse. Her face remained cold and calculating, as if she were still looking for an angle to exploit. "Miss Winters, you are hereby sentenced to 3 years in state prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation.
You were also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $250,000 to cover Miss Chen's legal fees, lost wages, and damages related to the harm caused to her reputation and career. The gavel came down with finality, and Rachel felt a weight she'd been carrying for months finally lift from her shoulders. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the nightmare was officially over. Marcus's sentencing had taken place 2 months earlier in a different courtroom. His situation had been more complex, given his role as both perpetrator and victim of Stephanie's manipulation. Sarah had worked with the prosecution to ensure he received appropriate consequences while also getting the mental health treatment he desperately needed. He'd been sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility with extensive counseling programs, followed by 3 years of probation and mandatory therapy. He was also required to pay restitution to Rachel, though the amount was significantly less than Stephanie's, reflecting his status as someone who had been manipulated rather than the primary architect of the scheme.
The hardest part for Rachel had been testifying about the impact of her brother's betrayal. She'd spent an hour on the witness stand describing not just the professional and social consequences, but the deep personal trauma of being attacked by someone she'd loved and trusted her entire life. But she'd also spoken about forgiveness and healing. Marcus had spent the months leading up to his sentencing in intensive therapy, working to understand how his depression and jealousy had made him vulnerable to Stephanie's manipulation. He'd written Rachel a 20-page letter taking full responsibility for his actions and detailing his commitment to making amends. Unlike Stephanie, Marcus's remorse was genuine and complete. The brother Rachel remembered was still there, buried under years of untreated mental illness and resentment, but still there. Their relationship would never be the same, but with time and continued therapy, it might eventually be rebuilt into something healthier. As they left the courthouse after Stephanie's sentencing, Rachel was surprised to find Marcus waiting outside with their mother, Patricia. He looked different, thinner, more serious, but also more present than he'd been in years. The residential treatment program had been good for him. "Rachel," he said quietly, approaching with obvious nervousness, "I know I don't have the right to ask, but could we talk for a few minutes?" Rachel looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. Over the past 6 months, he'd been incredibly supportive of her desire to rebuild her relationship with Marcus, even though he had every right to want nothing to do with her brother. They walked to a small park across from the courthouse, leaving Patricia and David to talk with Sarah about the final legal details. Marcus sat heavily on a bench, staring at his hands. "I watched the sentencing on the live stream," he said finally. "Stephanie showed no remorse at all, even at the end." "No," Rachel agreed. "She didn't." "It's hard to believe I was so completely fooled by her," Marcus continued. "My therapist says that's part of how manipulation works. The victim becomes convinced they're making their own choices when they're really just following a script the manipulator wrote." Rachel studied her brother's profile. "Do you understand now why what you did was so devastating, even if you were being manipulated?" Marcus nodded, tears starting to flow down his cheeks. "I understand that I let my own pain and jealousy blind me to what was really happening. I understand that even if Stephanie gave me the weapons, I was the one who chose to use them against you. And I understand that I may have destroyed our relationship forever." "Marcus," Rachel said gently, "you didn't destroy it forever. You damaged it severely, and it's going to take years to rebuild the trust we once had, but you're my brother, and I love you. The difference between you and Stephanie is that you're genuinely working to become a better person." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching families play in the park. Normal families, Rachel thought, without the complicated dynamics of betrayal and manipulation that had defined her own for the past year. "I'm going to continue with therapy even after my sentence is complete, and I want to volunteer with organizations that help people with depression and mental health issues. I think maybe my experience could help other people avoid making the same mistakes I did." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Rachel replied, and meant it. A year later, Rachel stood in the same church where she and David had originally planned to get married before moving the ceremony to the country club. This time, they were renewing their vows in a small, intimate ceremony with just family and close friends. The past year has been about healing and rebuilding. Rachel's career had not only survived the scandal, but actually flourished as her story became known. Henderson and Associates had stood behind her completely, and her handling of the crisis had led to a promotion to senior marketing director. More importantly, her marriage to David had emerged stronger than ever. They'd gone through couples counseling to process the trauma of their wedding day, and the experience had taught them to communicate more openly about their fears and insecurities. Marcus was there, sober and focused, having completed his sentence and continuing with weekly therapy. He wasn't in the wedding party. That level of trust would take more time to rebuild, but his presence felt right in a way it hadn't for years. Sarah Castellanos was there too, having become not just Rachel's attorney, but one of her closest friends. She'd turned down several lucrative job offers to start her own practice, specializing in representing victims of cyberbullying and defamation. As Rachel and David exchanged their renewed vows, she reflected on how much they'd all learned about love, forgiveness, and justice. Stephanie was still in prison, serving her sentence, and apparently still refusing to acknowledge the harm she'd caused. Some people, Rachel had learned, are simply too damaged or malicious to be redeemed. But others, like Marcus, could find their way back to the light with enough support and genuine effort. "I promise to love you through whatever challenges life brings us," David said, his voice strong and clear. "We've already proven that our love can survive the worst betrayal imaginable. I know now that together we can handle anything." When they kissed this time, there was no shattered glass, no devastating revelations, no family members destroying everything they'd built. There was only love, hard-won and tested by fire, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about their happiness. Later, at the small reception, Rachel watched Marcus helping to serve cake to the guests with a shy smile. He was different now, more thoughtful, more aware of his impact on others, more grateful for the second chance he'd been given. "He's really changed," David observed, following her gaze. "Yes," Rachel agreed, "but it took losing everything for him to find himself again." As the evening wound down, Sarah approached them with a bottle of champagne and 3 glasses. "I wanted to make a toast," she said, "to survive betrayal, finding justice, and building something beautiful from the wreckage." They clinked glasses as the sun set behind them, and Rachel realized that while her wedding day had been destroyed, her marriage was stronger than ever. Sometimes, she thought, the most beautiful things grow in the spaces left behind by destruction. The last year had taught her that family bonds could be broken and rebuilt, that justice was worth fighting for, and that love, real love, could survive even the most devastating attacks. But most importantly, she'd learned that when someone tries to destroy your life with lies, the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes or how much it costs. As she looked around at the faces of the people who truly loved her, Rachel knew that Stephanie's greatest failure wasn't getting caught or going to prison. It was believed that love could be destroyed by lies, when in reality, true love only gets stronger when it's tested by fire. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.